morning.
Good morning.
So, how many people were here on Mother's Day? I did a wonderful talk on Mother's Day called Mothers of New Thought. And then Father's Day came around, so even though on Mother's Day I said really this entire movement was started solely by women, the more that I researched the men involved, the more I have to kind of take that back a little bit. Because we live our lives in balance. So I'm going to give us just a little bit of acknowledgement to the male energy that has come forward and helped pave the way for us to be able to sit here today. Because this, if you haven't noticed, is a different place than many of the places people are sitting in on Sunday morning. No one's yelling at you. We're not threatening you with eternal hellfire and damnation. We're not saying that there's anything wrong with you. We are saying that you are a perfect manifestation of a perfect spirit, that there is within you the light and the love and the glory of the divine, that you don't have to go get it and try to shove it in, you don't have to buy it, that you already came out of it, and so it is what you are. We tell you that there is a power that we can use through our thoughts and our words and our belief system to manifest our lives. And that by the use of this power and conscious choice, we can manifest anything that we want. That's why we can have the lives that we want. That's why we can manifest things that appear to be impossible. We're good at impossible. Yeah, we're good at impossible because we know that the only thing that makes something impossible is the belief that it's impossible. That's why we like to walk on fire. Because people say, what are you, out of your minds? That's impossible. Yes, and we do it. So I want to give us just a little bit of a greater appreciation for what has come together to allow us to have these kinds of thoughts and conversations and lives. And so in looking at the fathers of New Thought, I'm going to take us way back before what we would commonly term New Thought, all the way back to the Buddha. The Buddha lived about 500 years before Jesus, and he achieved a state of enlightenment. He, I believe, was one of those masters that came to planet Earth to bring in an energy of enlightenment and awareness. And he called it the middle way. If you don't know about the Buddha, he was born a prince, and he was very protected from the world. He had a chance to be outside of the palace gates once, and he saw someone sick and dying, and he had never seen that before. And he asked his servant, what was that? And he was told, that is pain and suffering and death. And then the servant looked at him and said, you too will die. Well, this was a big shock for this prince, because he had never thought about that. And so he began to sneak out of the palace until finally he renounced all of his worldly possessions, all of the life that his royalty gave him, and he went to live the life of a monk, renouncing everything. And just really fast story of Buddha, forgive me any of you that are scholars on this, but he got to the point where he was almost dead. He was sitting by a river and he was dying because he was starving to death. And a child came and offered him a bowl of rice. And he took the bowl of rice because he said, well, obviously dying isn't going to help me. The life that I lived as a prince wasn't going to help me. So there must be a middle way. There must be a way that travels the middle path. And that's what Buddha's teachings were all about, the middle way. And he brought some very interesting ideas to his followers. The Buddha said, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. I think he was a religious scientist. And then he said, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. And not very long after Buddha, we had the Greek philosopher Plato come. And what the Greeks added to this mix that is now called New Thought through Plato was the development of the philosophical concept of transcendence. The verb to transcend means to go beyond something. In Transcendentalism, which we're going to pick up in a couple of minutes, it meant that there are truths that go beyond or transcend proof. These were truths that were simply known but could not be proven with logic. These truths were a private experience of faith and conviction. And so Plato actually brought forth the idea that there was something that transcended that which was logical, that which could be seen, that which was in the physical, material plane. There was something else going on. And then we'll jump forward to Jesus. Now, those of you who have longed to see a picture of Jesus in this room, take it in. It was the nicest one I could find. And we have a lot of the influence of Jesus in our teaching. Ernest Holmes was very Jesus-filled through his early years. That was the culture of this country. And the other New Thought organizations of Unity School of Practical Christianity, Divine Science, Christian Science, those all have a lot of the influence of Jesus, but we don't have the Jesus that so many other people have. People ask me if we're Christian, and I always say it depends. Depends on what you mean. Because we don't teach that there is a heaven and a hell. We don't teach that there is a devil or evil. We don't teach that there is an outside God. Interesting, because Jesus didn't teach that either. He said, if your leaders say to you, look, the kingdom is in the sky, then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, it is in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you, and it is outside of you. Oh, it's inside of us. Inside of us. And he said, whatever ye ask in prayer, believing you have received, you shall receive. It's all about our belief, all about our thoughts, just like Buddha. I bet Buddha and Jesus were buds. And he says, truly, truly, that means really, I'm not lying to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these. So this wasn't about copying Jesus, which a lot of denominations say is impossible, that apostolic era is over, the era of healing and the miracles that Jesus did. He's saying that you're supposed to do bigger things. I walked on water, you guys go walk on fire. You know, I pulled a coin out of a fish. You pull a $1 million lottery ticket out of the machine. You're supposed to do greater things than this. And then he said, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. So did he influence us? Absolutely. But directly. We don't give a lot of credit to what people say he meant or what he would have said if he had been given the opportunity. No, he was given plenty of opportunity, and he said what he meant to say, which means that the kingdom of heaven is within you. You control your experience through your belief and your faith, and you are supposed to do great things. And then we had influence from another philosopher named Immanuel Kant. And he actually gave Transcendentalism its name. He influenced, and stay with me here, take a deep breath, because we're setting the dominoes in motion now. Kant influenced the works of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Thomas Carlyle, and especially Carlyle was exchanging ideas with Emerson. So Kant, a German philosopher, through his writings influenced the work of these English writers who ended up influencing Emerson. And now we have Emerson. Now, a lot of people will say that Emerson is the father of New Thought. Well, I'm not sure that's true, but he certainly had a big push in changing the consciousness of this country. Transcendentalism is a uniquely American religion. It is an American philosophy. This was the time of the Puritan ethic, the very rigid ideas about what religion and spirituality and man's relationship with God and the world is all about. And along comes Emerson. And he had some very different ideas about what life was about. He brought the Transcendentalist movement to New England and nurtured it. Now get this, that neighbors born within a few years and a few miles from each other in New England were Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, John Greenleaf Whittier, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Henry David Thoreau, and James Russell Lowell. They all lived almost next door to Emerson. Actually, Walden Pond was on the Emerson estate, and Emerson funded Thoreau while he did all of his soul searching and writing. Emerson was paying the bill for that. They all gathered. Alcott, the father of Louisa May Alcott, who wrote Little Women, they all would gather together and they would talk about these ideas, these new ideas. There was no distance. They all incarnated at the same spot, and something magical started to be birthed through the minds of these people, men mostly, coming together and discussing ideas that were very foreign to most people. Transcendentalism was the beginning of American interest in Eastern thought. You know, Eastern thought to us is so normal. We're talking about the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, and we had a picture of Buddha, and everybody knew exactly who that was. But there was a time not too long ago that people did not know what Eastern thought was. But Emerson and his friends were reading the Hindu literature, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita. They were reading literature from Confucius and from the Buddha and from the Mohammedan Sufis. The most famous, my guess, would be Rumi and Hafiz. They were reading these ideas, and something was being birthed in consciousness. Transcendentalism became an eclectic composite of Eastern, Greek, English, French, German, and Native American thought. They brought it all together. Transcendentalism is a belief there is a higher reality and greater knowledge than that manifested in the human mind. It divides reality into a realm of spirit and a realm of matter. This was so new, so big. Now here is the man that is called the father of New Thought. And his name is Phineas Quimby. I laughed when Julia Roberts named her twins Phineas and Hazel. Ernest's wife's name was Hazel. Now those are just two odd names to pull out of thin air if you don't have some connection with New Thought, Phineas and Hazel. But here's Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, and he was a very interesting man. Keep in mind, this is in the day when there is no television, there are no movies, concerts are few and far between, and the way that people were entertained is they would go to see acts. Remember when I talked about the mothers of New Thought, they would ride the rails. The railway was huge in opening up the consciousness of Americans because people could ride the rails, stop off in a city, and give a lecture or put on a show. Do something that people, because they're bored out of their minds, would come out and they would watch. That was entertainment. That was it, you know, somebody's coming to town. And so a man came to town named Antoine Mesmer, and he was a French man that had been exposed to this idea that there's both a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, and that you could put someone in a trance and they could know stuff. They could know stuff about themselves. They could know stuff about each other. They could put their hands on someone and heal them. They could give them a remedy and they would get better. Now, whether or not that was the power of suggestion, who cares? So up comes Antoine Mesmer, and he has a farmhand. And he puts the farmhand under, and the farmhand then talks to the people who are lined up with ailments. This was before antibiotics, before any kind of decent surgical procedure. People had ailments. And so they would walk away and they would be healed. And Quimby just started to study this idea. That's where we get the whole idea of mesmerizing. And that evolved into hypnosis. But Quimby would study this, and he was saying, how does that work? There must be a part of that person that's not conscious, that has access to a greater reality, that can have information, that can do things that at a conscious level that person would not normally do. And so he started studying and studying and studying, and he would travel the country and heal people. He healed thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They called him the American healer. Really, what a guy. He said, as a man begins to reason from another starting point, different results are accomplished. Wow. If you start to reason, if you start to think from a different starting point, then you get a different result. And this is a quote that I particularly enjoyed. I found I was the very idea I was looking for. Isn't that great? And then we moved on from Quimby to Thomas Troward. Judge Thomas Troward, born in the Punjab, India, which is now Pakistan, educated in England, and went back to the Punjab to be a judge. And he learned a lot from the Hindu, from the Islam religion, from all of that. He was exposed in all of his life. He left India and came back to England, retired, and found new thought. He was so caught up in it that he almost immediately began lecturing. And Troward is the one who coined the phrase mental science. He's the first one who came up and said, this is a mental science. That's what we're doing. We are studying mental science. Take a deep breath, because anytime you hear Troward, it goes on and on. Troward says, the student who would understand the rationale of the unfoldment of his own possibilities must make no mistake here. He must realize that the whole process is that of bringing the universal within the grasp of the individual by raising the individual to the level of the universal, and not vice versa. It is a mathematical truism that you cannot contract the infinite, and that you can expand the individual, and it is precisely on these lines that evolution works. So many of us are trying to make God little to fit into our problem, instead of making us big to connect with that infinite presence that moves through us. All right, we're going to move on. I have a million Troward quotes I could tell you. The next one that had a deep impact on us is Charles Fillmore. Now I know in May I said that it was Myrtle who got the healing and dragged Charles in, and that's true. But he still had his own experience. He had a hip that had tuberculosis of the hip since he was a child. It was a lot smaller than the other leg. His leg was all shriveled. And because his wife had experienced a healing of tuberculosis, he started doing these affirmations and thinking these thoughts, and his leg started to grow. Until finally his leg was normal and he could walk without crutches. And Charles and his wife Myrtle started Unity. And Unity is a huge movement in this country and has affected the lives of millions and millions and millions of people, and is also a big reason why we are here today. And then we have my beloved Ernest Holmes. And Ernest Holmes started Science of Mind, or religious science. He did not want to start churches. He never wanted to start churches, but he had all these ministers that were in his classes that were teaching at other denominations, and they were no longer happy with their old denominations, and they said, we want to start doing our work, doing our gift in this alignment of this teaching of science of mind. And so all of a sudden we have buildings and grounds and Sunday morning experiences. He started reading Emerson when he was in his teens. And when he discovered Troward in 1914, which was before he wrote any of his books, he said, "This is as near to my own thoughts as I shall ever come." He began speaking on Troward when he was 25, not realizing that his ministry had started. He totally absorbed Troward's ideas and linked them with his own, and he was one of the main channels through which Thomas Troward's teachings came into the United States. And Ernest says, "The science of mind is the study of life and the nature of the laws of thought, the conception that we live in a spiritual universe, that God is in, through, around, and for us." Wow, we are spiritual beings. And whatever God is in, through, around, and for us. One of Ernest's big teachers was Bill Hornaday. He had the church in Los Angeles. They had over 7,000 people there on Sundays when Dr. Bill was doing Founders Church in LA. And then we have Raymond Charles Barker. If you remember when Lloyd Tupper was here, he talks about his teacher, Dr. Barker. And I actually knew Raymond Charles Barker in my younger Science of Mind years. He had the church in New York, and he and Eric Butterworth had two sides of Alice Tully Hall. You'd park, you'd go into Lincoln Center, and if the Science of Mind one was full, you'd go over to Unity. And if the Unity one was full, you'd go over to Science of Mind, and they had thousands and thousands and thousands of people meeting in downtown New York City every Sunday. It was just the way it was. And Raymond Barker said, "The principle of life is that life responds by corresponding. Your life becomes the thing that you have decided it to be." And then we have Eric Butterworth, who was a Unity in New York. And a lot of you, or some of you, are studying spiritual economics with Christy on Tuesday nights. Eric Butterworth wrote that book. And he said, "On human levels of consciousness, one may emphasize getting and having as the prime goals. In spiritual consciousness, he seeks the way of giving and being." And this is his affirmation: "I am secure, for I know who I am, a richly endowed child of God. I am secure in all I do, for I know my oneness with the divine process. I am secure in all I have, for I know my treasure is in my mind, not in my things. I live my life from day to day as if God's supportive substance were as inexhaustible and dependable as the air I breathe," which it is, and most certainly is. And then we have Dr. Robert Bitzer, and I got to tell you, he was a scary man. He was a scary man. That picture really captures him. He had the Hollywood Church of Religious Science, when we used to call ourselves Church of Religious Science. Now we're Centers for Spiritual Living. But he had the one in Hollywood, and he also had thousands of people coming to listen to him teach them how to be. He's the one that I always quote that says, "Principle is not bound by precedent." Now, he was quoting Troward, but think about that. Principle, the law of the universe, is not bound by precedent. It's not bound by what has already been. It doesn't matter what's already been. It is infinite. It can move forward into new things. Principle is not bound by precedent. I don't care if it hasn't ever been done before. It's obviously time for it to be done now. And then we have Jack Addington, who had the Abundant Living Foundation. This was in radio time, and he had a radio show on that touched thousands and thousands of people. We have Jack Boland of Renaissance Unity in Detroit. That's the church that Marianne Williamson took over. Let me tell you, he had thousands of people there before Marianne Williamson came and had it be so big. And he's the one that brought 12-step into Science of Mind. And you gotta understand this. Bill Wilson and Ernest Holmes knew each other. They knew each other. That's why if you're ever reading the big book and it sounds kind of Science of Mindy, it is. They read each other's books, and Ernest said to Bill Wilson, he said, "Yours is simpler." But they knew each other. And so Jack Boland was big into 12 steps, and they had hundreds and hundreds of people coming into that Unity Church in Detroit through the 12-step program. And that opened up the doors for all of the other churches and centers to say, maybe we should have 12-step programs here. It couldn't hurt. And then we have the Fathers of New Thought. I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to Kennedy Schultz, who had the Atlanta church. He was a student of Dr. Barker, and he had, I think, a couple of years of classes and said, okay, I've got it. I'm going to go out and start a church in Atlanta. And Barker said, no, you can't. You don't have credentials yet. And he said, I don't care. I'm going to go start a church in Atlanta. And there have got to be half a dozen churches in Atlanta now that are a direct result of Kennedy Schultz. We have Fred Vogt that started the work in Denver, actually took the work over in Denver and made it big. They built a giant geodesic dome, and now they've got an even bigger one with Roger Teal, and 1,500 people 3 times on a Sunday come together to get this idea that God is in them, and they can have anything they want if they can wrap their heads around it. We have David Walker, who was the minister in Los Angeles and one of the presidents of the organizations. Tom Costa, who had a group in Palm Springs and Palm Desert. He would do one, he'd get in a car, he'd drive almost an hour and do it all over again in a different city. He did that for decades. And now there's this great big center in Palm Desert and Palm Springs. And then I'm going to bring you really close up to current day and bring this to a close. These Fathers of New Thought. And we have Dr. Ken Gordon, who is the first spiritual leader of Centers for New Thought. He and his wife, Deborah, co-founded the Center for Spiritual Living Kelowna, Canada, 20 years ago. And he has brought a coming together of 2 organizations that swore they would never step foot in the same room again. Some of these old pictures that you saw, some of those people had issues. They did. And some of them said, like Dr. Barker and Dr. Bitzer, over my dead body, and we had to wait for that. But Ken Gordon, as the president of Religious Science International Centers for Spiritual Living, led the way for this to happen, and I'm eternally grateful to him, and he is our spiritual leader. And I could not let this close without our beloved, who is the first president of Centers for Spiritual Living. We sat in our living room for well over 10 years, treating every day that these organizations would come back together, because the time of having 7,000 people on a Sunday is here. The time of having thousands and thousands of people awaken to that presence of God within them is here. And when we went through that split and people held on to anger and got burned and forgot that their thoughts were creating their reality and lived in a world of duality and two-ness, we stopped growing as a movement. We have exactly the same number of churches and centers when we came back together again that we had when we split. You can't grow while you're mad. You can't grow while you're living in duality and you're forgetting who you are. So for 10 years, and John caught a lot of flack. People were angry with him. How dare you even bring this conversation up? This will never happen. Drop it. Leave it alone. 10 years knowing that that was going to happen, that that was his to do. And he did it. And now he's president. And even though we don't get to see him very much, I think we'll just put his picture up every so often. So these are the fathers, the male beings that have come together to bring a change in consciousness, which I see it in Joel Osteen. People say, oh, Wayne Dyer learned everything he knew from us. Deepak Chopra, yes, it's all science of mind. It's all, Robert Schuller took a class from Bill Hornaday in Los Angeles. There are people alive that were in that class. Les Brown is a student of this teaching. These things came together to wake people up so that they would understand that there is something more than meets the eye that they can use. And whether it's come through as sales or motivational training or under the banner of New Thought, Science of Mind, Unity, whatever, it's coming out and people are waking up. And for me, that is the most important. So to all of the men in the room and all of the women with a lot of yang energy, I say Happy Father's Day. Thank you for all that you do.